quite a topic today. So welcome to our next episode of Full Stack Web Development from Zero to Hero 2020. What we're going to talk about, let's actually go into the curriculum and see where we are. So we are right here. So GitHub and, oops, sorry about that. Git and GitHub. What is that? There are alternatives to GitHub, by the way, but I mean, we want to keep things pretty straightforward today. So that is something that you probably have heard a lot, and the question is basically, okay, what does this actually mean? What does this do, right? So first of all, what is a version control system? That would be something that would allow you to basically save your development at certain points in time, and it goes far beyond that. So, but let's basically say think about like rollbacks, just like a history where you can say like, okay, I have everything I did is basically captured, and I can jump back to any point in time, just like a backup if you want. So, and that's not even how it works on a, I mean, that works how it works on a high level, but I mean, I can even then cherry pick and say, yeah, those changes were good, those changes I want to revert, and stuff like that. Now the whole thing gets a little bit more complexity because this can also branch. So what I would do is basically when I try something out, for example, I would create a branch, like work on that a little bit, and then decide whether or not I'm going to merge it in to the main stream or main branch, also referred to as master, or not. And so that is something that on a collaborative level, and that's why we talk about it. So the reason why Git is so popular is not so much because what you do on your own, but in the industry, you need to be able to basically collaborate with people and merge code in a logical way without causing any kind of issues and overriding each other's files and stuff like that. That's why in reality, what you do when you're done with a particular branch, or basically, like you worked out a certain addition to the complete code, you would have a so-called pull request, here shortened to PR, and basically kind of request that your code be added to the software itself, right? So it's important to understand that from the beginning, the way we're going to look at it is from the start, like local versus remote. So remote is something that would be outside of the realm of your own machine. So we're going to use GitHub for that. That's going to maintain basically our remote. So that's basically going to be the dictating point. And what we're going to do is to basically get into the idea of working locally, and we then basically have to communicate with the remote to basically say, okay, this is what it's. Those are my local updates. Please work with them accordingly. So there are a couple of things that can happen, right? So just imagine that two people work on the same branch. So both check out a particular branch and they start working on it, and then they start committing. So let's just say person A would push to the remote, and after that person B would push to the remote. Then potentially there are two conflicting versions of let's just say a particular file now. Because person B wasn't aware of what that person A has already, pushed to the remote repository, and therefore a conflict arises. And Git kind of takes care of that for you. So if you forget to do that, then basically you have a missing commit in your local machine. So person B would basically not be able to push to the remote, and that is a very good thing because then you can't overwrite. So you're gonna get a warning, and it basically says you need to update your local code base in order to make sure that conflicts are resolved on your end and not saved to the remote. So that's pretty cool. As a like super basic cheat sheet, cheat sheet, I basically have two different things here. So we don't even gonna worry about any of this too much. But so the starter or the code owner, if you want, so can so Git is something you need to install. We did that in the setup. So Git init would basically generate a new Git repository locally, and then when you make some kind of changes, what you do is you do git add. The dot would basically, I'm always assuming you're in the context of the actual folder that you're working in, just to make things a little bit easier. So then you have your git init, basically that would generate the repository, and then git add a dot would basically say, please consider all files that are in this repository that are not in the Git Ignore, which is something that we also will not have time to get into, unfortunately, but just so you've heard that before. And then you do git commit, and then m, and then here you put your commit message. How that should look like, there are a lot of different opinions on it, but please don't, use this so it makes sense for others reading it. And by the way, for you in half a year from now. So don't say like updated files or whatever. Like make this a logical description of what you actually did. And then git push remote. So here the remote that would normally be like something like origin and then whatever, and that would then push to the branch that is not local but remote in that case, right? So if you aren't the code owner and you haven't started this project, then this probably looks more like on the right for you. So you clone a particular repository, and then basically you can check out particular branches by the checkout command, and then this could either be basically a new one that you create, or it could be an existing one. And that depends basically what's already what's your branching strategy, which is basically something that we're going to look into now, and I hope it's not too overwhelming. But so there are a lot of different approaches to how to go about your branching strategy. One of the most common forms is that you will work in something that is called agile development. Agile development is, there's an agile manifesto. You probably heard of Scrum or Kanban, and the basic principle is that you have a continuous development cycle that is structured in a particular way. Now, you probably also heard that you should never push to master, and that is true, and I would recommend that even if you're working on projects completely on your own. So how could something like this look like? So this is the master, so basically that's our software release, right? So let's just assume we have version 1 of a particular code base. So if you haven't heard of semantic versioning, this is something that you've probably seen a lot. So the first one would be like basically the main version, the second one would be the minor, and the last one would be for patches. And so what that basically means kind of depends on what kind of technology you're working with. But so what should be absolutely clear is, so a patch is not a breaking change whatsoever. That's normally like little improvements, bug fixes, and so on. They don't change the overall functionality. A minor would basically be something where you're addressing features that are add-ons, but also don't cause any kind of breaking changes. And the main version, of course, is a main version, so that could potentially be a completely new iteration of your product here, right? But again, I mean, that kind of depends on what kind of technologies you're working with, and it's really hard to give you any kind of general suggestion on how to use this. You would have to look that up depending on what kind of stack you're using and so on. In our case, well, we'll get to that when we actually get to that. Okay, so then the most common form of collaboration would be like having a sprint branch, right? So, or this could basically be the branch that would define, okay, what is, so normally you have something like a sprint planning. So basically, what are we going to do in the next, I don't know, let's say 4 weeks. And then you have goals that you're working against. So this is normally organized in stories, but this could might as well be GitHub issues, or I mean there are a thousand different forms of working with it. But basically, this is the to be version, right? So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to branch off the master, so the current version, into basically something that is going to eventually be our version 1.10. Okay, so at this point it's exactly the same. There are no differences whatsoever. And what we start doing here then is to say, okay, we're gonna branch this out again to our single features that we want to work on. So in this scenario, there are 2 features that are planned for the sprint. And so there are a couple of steps in between here that we will get into like in real life in a second. But let's just assume the following now. So this is now all of a sudden the branch I'm working against. So in GitHub, we will also set this as the main branch. So that is the one that we're basically working with until we're done. And when we're done, we are going to have a pull request into master. Okay, so that's basically what we want to do. So, and then we have those 2 features, and let's just assume that we either both work on those features. Like it doesn't matter. Let's just say developer A works on this feature, developer B works on this feature, just to make it simple. And so there's a particular goal that is defined. So again, this could be a GitHub issue or a story, depending on how you work. And by the way, it's not an exclusive or, so most of the time issues are used to define stories, but story would only be the term if you're actually using a methodology that would basically use that term, right? So if you're thinking Scrum, then basically story makes sense to you. If not, just ignore it. And developer B here works on a different one, and basically, well, they're busy for the time being. Now, what happens basically is when feature 1 is done, then developer A sends a pull request to the sprint branch. But before that's happening, there's actually an update from the sprint branch itself. Why? Well, because in theory, developer A does not know whether or not other features have already been pulled into the sprint branch, right? So there could be something that has changed here, in which case there would be a conflict that developer A would need to resolve. In order to avoid that, before pushing, the developer basically merges in the remote sprint branch and checks if there are any kind of issues with what he's done or any kind of conflicts. And if that is not the case, he basically sends a pull request to the sprint branch. So it doesn't directly merge into the sprint branch locally. He actually sends a pull request. And that is basically what developer B does as well. There's no difference in here. I mean, in our example, this will not do anything. So when developer A pulls down, it will basically tell him all files are already up to date. But if developer B pulls in any updates, it will basically update feature 1. In the case that the pull request that developer A requested was basically approved by the code owner. Okay, so in our example, what we're going to do right now, we're going to be all of those, but just so you understand what the regular process would be. And then the code owner would also not just randomly do that. So normally there's a code review cycle, and where people would actually do 2 steps. So first of all, there would be something that is referred to as continuous integration. So particular tests of that feature would be run. Again, this is we're far ahead from getting into this. We don't need this at that point, but just so you've heard that before. So the particular tests of the feature would basically run, and if they're approved, then there's a review process by a peer. That could be, for example, developer B, and then the PR is approved and pulled into the sprint branch. That's how it would work, and naturally the same happens at this point, right? Where here it's pulled in. So there are 2 options now. Either it has nothing to do with whatever developer B worked on, it's all fine, or this causes some kind of conflicts that need to be resolved, and then they're resolved on this end, and then the same thing happens: pull request, continuous integration, code review, and then approval. Okay, so let's play this through a little bit. Okay, so what we want to do is, so I'm on GitHub. You will need a GitHub account, and I'm just going to create a new repository that I'm going to take. I'm going to call Git video. Okay, I will not do any kind of description here. So there are different ways of you remember we just looked at how to generate Git repositories local first. We're not going to do that for now. We're going to do that directly in here. Okay, description, this is a test, and we're going to have it public for now. That will confuse a couple of people, but that's fine. Add a Git Ignore. Actually, let's do this. Let's do actually none for now, and add a Git Ignore. What do we have here? Let's just add a Git Ignore. It says none. This is so interesting. Doesn't do it for Node. Yeah, let's do that. So I assume that the Node modules are at least in there already. But again, this is not really, I just want to have anything in there, right? So I now say create repository. Okay, so I now have this repository, and basically have a Git Ignore and a README in there. Again, this is not really interesting. What you can see in the Git Ignore is, there's way more in there than I thought. For all kinds of testing. Oh, cool. For grunt. Jesus. Okay, let's actually, this goes too far. So what we want to do is basically we now assume that this is our master, and which it is, right? So if I go back here and I see branch master, that is the current state of my software, right? So I can see that there's only one branch here, right? That is the master branch. So this is my particular version. So what I was, if I wanted to have a release, I could basically do this now and say, I'm not going to do that, but I mean, okay, this is my here version 1.0 release, and that's all fine. What I really want to do at this point, though, is to create my first sprint branch. So I'm going to call this sprint 001. Okay. Now this is my sprint branch now, as you can see. So the next thing I want to do in this case is I want to make sure that nobody is allowed to send any kind of pull requests to master. In order to help that, I can do a couple of things. I can basically go to settings and say branches. And so the default branch right now is going to be sprint 1. It's going to warn me, hey, if somebody's working on, that's not the issue right now. And then branch protection rules, I can basically add a rule here and say, all kinds of things that I want to do here. So allow force pushes for deletions, no. Include administrators, require linear history, require signed commits, require status checks to pass before merging. Yeah, we don't have any of this right now, but what we probably want to do here is require reviews. And again, we cannot do that because we can't review our own code in this example, but I mean, that's probably something that we want to do. And I can then here have a kind of expression of what kind of pattern. So if this has sprint, right, then that's something that I would normally probably want to do. So I'm not going to do any of this for our example, otherwise we really can't work with it. But so the first thing that I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to clone or download. So again, this is my default branch now, right? And so here is this is the actual Git, right? I would need that for clone. Okay. I hope they copied it. I don't get any kind of feedback. We'll see that in a second. So I'm going to do that in my PHP Storm. But what this does is it has a git clone and then this URL. That's all it's doing. Right, so I might have in this. I could have also basically done this in the terminal. We've seen that command on the slideshow, and basically what you see now is I automatically checked out the Git sprint branch. Right, this one. Okay, so I'm going to create a new branch now. So that's a checkout command. It's a checkout command. See, that's what it does. Checkout branch. So again. Think about what we've just seen if you need to do this with a terminal. And basically, I'm going to call this feature. And how do we call it? A1. Let me just quickly see. We call this feature 1. Okay, a little bit boring, but sure. Okay, this is going to be feature 1. I'm going to create this. Now, interesting to know now, and this is probably something that makes your life a little bit easier. So this doesn't exist yet, right? I don't have, as you can see, there's no such thing as a remote branch. So it might be easier to basically generate this here, feature 1, right? And then clone that if that's is an easier process for you. So I basically did that locally now. And actually, what I probably want to do here is, instead of all of this, just because none of this I need, I actually want to have the idea. You can't see this, but my editor has this kind of setup folder. And this is basically what I want to work with. So feature 1 will basically be pretty simple. So as you can see, Git Ignore itself, now that I get this different coloring, so that has changed. So I might as well run the commit. And we have seen how that works. So I have a commit message that the rest is done automatically for me. So I'm going to say change.git ignore to work with blank PHP Storm project. Okay, I'm going to commit that. And again, I could have done this like this as well, right? Git commit and then here did whatever, right? Could have done that as well. Again, I'm just lazy. I'm using my editor. Same for the pull request and so on. So the first thing, feature 1, I'm going to now pretend that feature 1 is to be to create an HTML file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new HTML file. I'm going to call this HTML file index. Okay. Now it's going to ask me automatically in my case whether or not I want to add this file to Git. In that case, I do that. So again, you normally would do that with the add command in Git. Just my editor basically does that, and you see now it's green, so it's added but not committed. Okay, so Git basically monitors this file now, but it's not. This is an uncommitted change that we have. So let's say Git example, and here in the body I basically say I don't know, h1. I really don't know. Here is an example. Okay, so that's basically it. So we're going to commit that again and say edit basic index HTML. Actually, let's do it like this. I'm going to commit that one. And that's basically all I'm going to do for feature 1, so we get somewhere today. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to push, right? So again, let's think about what's happening. So in theory, somebody else now already worked on any of this. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to update the project. So I'm going to pull in anything that's there. Merge incoming changes into current branch. I can't check that, even though this is kind of like nonsense, because as soon as this is actually happening, this branch doesn't exist, so nothing happened. Here it says no track branch to configured for branch feature 1. That's what I expected. I didn't know that yet in the context menu, and then the update canceled, so that's fine. There's nothing I can update. I am basically the only one with having that feature, which basically means what I can do now is I can actually push to this origin feature 1, and here you can see there are 2 commits that I'm going to push. So let's do that. Oops. Okay. Now I successfully pushed. So if we go back to this, you can see here it says less than a minute ago, feature 1 was basically pushed, and I can basically now say compare and pull request. So here you can see on the sprint branch, I don't have any kind of index yet. And if you think back to like how we tried to get that back in, basically we're now in the feature branch that we could look at. So I can directly press this button here. So the only thing that's doing is it's basically suggesting, hey, do you want to have a pull request from feature 1 into sprint 0? And that's basically what we want to do. And I'm going to basically here say feature 1 finished adding basic HTML to project. I mean, again, this is like super primitive here, but okay. So what we normally would do, and we should have done that before, of course. Actually, let's ignore this for now. Let's do something else. So let's create an issue. So what you normally want to have is you want to have a couple of, and you can do that in settings, but that's normally not your problem at this point. You probably want to have templates for particular things, for example, for a story. But let's basically do this, okay? So here. And actually, I'm not even going to do this to agile. I'm going to basically say adding HTML to, or yeah, HTML homepage to project. Okay, and then probably you've seen this before as a, and then you basically place in what kind of well, entity you're talking to here. So basically, in this case, it's going to be a user, and then what you want to achieve, right? And this, by the way, that's the Scrum way of writing those kind of things, but there are different ways of doing that. As a user, I want to be able to get an overview of the project on the web page. Okay, something like this. Okay, and here I can have basically different ways of assigning that. Now this project, I'm not going to get into milestones and stuff like that, but there are a lot of third-party things that you can basically do in order to get that started. So I will actually call this now simply a story, which is something I have to create here. That color is green, sure, why not? And so I can also assign people. In that case, I'm going to assign myself to this story, and then say, okay, this exists. Right, so now we have an issue, and we're going to actually create another one. I'm going to call it add basic JS. And here I say, as a developer, I want to be able to influence the DOM as needed. Okay, this is so stupid and generic, but I guess you get the point. And that's going to be also for myself in that case, and that's also going to be a story. Okay, and submit new issue. Okay, now in my issue tracker, what I do have is I've got like 2 issues now that are both open, and in that case they're also assigned. I don't need to do that initially, but in that case they are assigned. So let's jump back to our code. So here again we have our feature 1. So let's assume we those issues, those were planned and defined before. So now I addressed one of them, right? So what I can do now is I can basically say, okay, this goes to a particular issue, right? As you can see, the use closing keywords, and that is something that let's actually look at this, so you see how that works. So when under the repository name, click linked issue. Hold on, this changed. This actually changed. 1 second. No, I just forgot that's for later. Okay, so so one word about you know, working in GitHub itself is you probably work with you know, third-party tools that would integrate for your logics, but we want to keep it as simple as possible in this one. So let's link the pull request after it's done. So at the first thing that we want to do here is those are basically the commits. So here you can see the history, right? So this is what changed. So the Git Ignore, all the minuses are basically reductions. So we got rid of all of this, and instead we added, here's the plus, this, and same here. Now in your IDE, you might have the possibility to look at this a little bit more beautiful, right? Where you can basically see, okay, this is what happened, and then you can see your basic branching strategy. And back to our comparison. So let's just assume that everything is fine, and I now create the pull request. Okay, So in most cases, here there would be particular CI integrations now that would check whether or not that fulfills a couple of things, whether or not the linting is correct and all kinds of things. But I mean that's all fine for now. So I have this pull request now open. I'm going to link a particular issue, and that is adding HTML to homepage, right? And now that is done. So what is the current status? So the current status is now that, okay, I have 3 branches in existence, right? That would, of course, be the master, sprint 1, and feature 1, okay? As you can see, the master is still in the original state. Nothing has changed to our version 1. Now we have 1 open pull requests, right, with feature 1. So somebody wants us to pull this in. Okay, so let's just assume that we're doing this now. Oh, and we also have 2 issues, by the way, right? Here, adding HTML homepage to project and add basic.js. So those are the 2 things that we want to achieve this sprint. And now let's just assume that I looked at this and I'm going to say, yes, this is approved. I'm going to pull this in. Right, feature 1, check and approved. Okay, so I can now, it's going to ask me to delete a branch. I'm not going to do that now because we're going to probably squash that later on. So what you can see now is I still have this 2 issues thing here, but in reality, if I click on it, what you notice is that 1 issue is open and 1 is closed. See that? So this is now done. This was fulfilled, and the open issue still stands, right? Now, in order to basically, let's not touch anything on our end, and let's just assume something here that happened now with developer B. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check out the local feature 1 branch. Sorry, the local sprint 1 branch. Okay. So as you can see, so locally I haven't updated this project. I still can't see that. Do you see that? It's still not there for me. So imagine now that I'm developer B, I still don't see that. So of course it makes sense every morning when I start working that I actually update. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to spin off a branch with feature 2 from this old version here to assume that that basically happened. So I'm going to create a new branch, and it's going to be called feature 2. Okay. So now I have my feature 2. That's the branch I'm currently working on, and I'm basically going to say let's create a JavaScript file. Let's call it script. I do want to add that to Git, and I want to basically say, okay, what do I want to say? I want to say, you know what, let's do something super mean here and say document add event listener, click, and say, and basically say log JavaScript included. Okay. Now, at this point, there are a couple of things that we should basically worry about, right? So I wouldn't, this script doesn't just run. I would normally include this in the index HTML, but I don't have that yet. So I just assume that I here say like, okay, edit basic JS script, and say, okay, commit. Okay, so at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to push this over. Push. Okay. Now this actually pushed up And now let's see what would happen in if we generated a pull request. So let's go back here and go back to code. And as you can see, feature 2 is now ready. Okay, comparing pull request. And okay, in this case, it's actually able to merge. Yeah, so we have no conflicts in this scenario. We actually need to do something else. Let me add something to that. So I'm going to say HTML file index, and I say, okay, yeah, add that to Git. And here we're going to have Git test, and we're also going to say, hey, at the end of the body, make sure that we include the script, right? Cool, let's commit that. So now we have an index, script.js to created index HTML, commit and push. Okay, let's do that. Okay, let's go back here and say, hey, here we want to have a, oh, by the way, this weird thing, those are just language specifics, right? So what kind of different languages are you using? So I'm going to say prepare and pull request, and here you now can say, nope, see that? Cannot automatically merge. So there's already, I mean, I can go ahead now and let somebody else take care of it, but of course it makes sense to say like, okay, apparently I missed something. There will be an issue. There are conflicts. Now, there are several ways to address those conflicts. I can basically do this in here if I do create a pull request. So let's actually do this. We can do all of this at once. And here it says, okay, this branch has conflicts, must be resolved. So I can basically look at the web editor, right? Let's do that maybe. And then here I can basically see, okay, see, those are the issues that we're facing, right? So here you can basically see this is from feature 2, right? Coming in here. So git test, and in the original one, it's git example. So that's an issue, right? And we have basically now the possibility to get that solved here manually. Of course, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to pull requests, and so this pull request is open. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to link this to an issue to make that clear. And then what I want to do is I want to get rid of those conflicts locally. So I now know that, okay, the issue is I should merge the current sprint into here, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the origin sprint one and merge that into current. I need to update first. Because I don't have that here. Yeah, here's sprint 1. Let's quickly do it like this, and then update. Okay. So I basically just quickly checked out sprint 1, and as you can see, here's the index that developer A got in for us, right? So now basically here's what I have here, and now my feature 2. So now I'm basically jumping back to what I have as developer B. And so now I have locally in feature 1, in sprint 1, the newest version. And if I say, okay, merge into current in that case, I can see the same output that I have here, right? And can basically work on this accordingly. But of course I can do this a little bit smarter and say, okay, what's the issue here? So this is what I have in feature 2. Is the left side, and this is what I have in the current sprint branch. So coming from feature 1 effectively, but already merged in, right? And now I can basically start, okay, how I'm going to do this. So if I can actually pull those in simultaneously and basically say, okay, what are the issues here, and here's an example. So I want to get rid of those things here, right? And basically say, yeah, this is, whoops, this and this too. Doesn't make any sense. So that's the result I'm looking for. Okay, fair enough. Apply, and that looks better to me, right? So now I have this issue basically resolved. Let's commit that. Oh, don't need to. Let's push that up. So here we have the merge already happened for us. Very good. And if I push that up now, and I have the complete commit history, then GitHub will basically stop bitching about it and see now this branch has no conflicts with the base branch. So now I can basically merge it. Okay. So again, normally somebody else would do this and basically review this one more time, but in my case, I'm going to do that alone, and basically going to merge it in. And what I find myself now is if I go to code, so I have 0 open issues, as you can see. Both of my things are fulfilled, and what I have now is basically that both of my issues are resolved. So I've got the index and I've got the script, right? You can look at that basically. Okay, this is basically now functioning code. So normally somebody would check that out and run that and do end-to-end testing, but let's just assume I'm happy with all of this. Okay, so what I would do then is I'm going to say, okay, let's now create the new version. So now we're going to say, okay, create new pull request, and I'm going to say, okay, I want to have sprint 1, and I actually want to put this into master. Right, able to merge, and now basically I say, okay, release version 1.1.0, and then in this sprint we addressed adding HTML, adding JS. Okay, super stupid, but that's fine. And then basically I create the pull request, and I'm gonna merge it in. Release version 1. Okay, confirm merge. Okay. Okay, so and now I'm completely done with my sprint, right? So here, if this is actually now a little bit weird. It now asks me, do you want to merge the master back into the sprint, because our sprint is still the well, basically the main branch at this point, and at this point it also has no history from other than from the master. So what we would do now is, of course, since this is the same version as master now, we can basically create a new branch based off of sprint 1, right? But in most cases it makes sense to basically create sprint 2 if that's the next step from the master branch, and that has a lot to do with how your history is going to look like. But that's a story that like simply too much to get into for now. The only thing I wanted to tell you is basically how Git works in general and how those things are achieved. Now that said, we will basically ask ourselves, what is a repo and what should be in a repo? So most people look at a repo as actually a project, and would only have like all of the project is basically one repository. But today that has become a little bit more complex, because we have so many different ways of saying, well, like the front end and the back end, that might be like a completely different project, and how they collaborate, like is more or less independent. And basically it makes sense to think of a repo more like as a coupled dependency, where you basically say, okay, if the project is complex enough, then a component could be a repository, right? And that's basically how I work with in bigger Neon 3 projects, and you will eventually probably figure out your own strategy. There's again so much to be said. This is a very, very basic example of what we're doing here, but you will find these principles more or less applied in all branching strategies, and it highly depends on the team you're going to end up with, how that actually works. Let's do the following though. Let's check out the origin master. So that's basically now our newest version. Let's update that. And basically look at what we have here, right? So if I go to version control, I can basically see, okay, this is what happened, right? So our green thing would be the master here. See that? This here would be our sprint 1. And here we can basically see what happened with the feature. See that? And how that behaved. And you can basically see the history, right, top to bottom, and can basically also I can basically jump in here and check out particular commits and so on. And I mean, there's really so much that can be done and set the head back and revert and you name it. Really a lot of possibilities that would allow you to tackle particular issues that came along the way. Anyway, that's basically it for this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope it helped. I know that Git can be confusing at the beginning, but it's more about the way of thinking and why we're doing it that needs to be understood than actually mastering it at this point. So thank you very much, and see you next time.